All right, welcome. I'd like to introduce Rick French, who is CEO of one of the most awarded PR, advertising, and digital media agencies in the entire country, French West Vaughan. And also, for today's topic, he is the lead producer for Not Without Hope, a feature film based on the dramatized retelling of an open water boating tragedy in the Gulf of Mexico. Rick, welcome.
Thanks, Crash. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So Not Without Hope recounts the events surrounding four friends on a fishing trip off the coast of Clearwater, Florida, that made national headlines, I guess about 16 years ago. Tell us how you originally got involved and a little bit about the four friends that were involved in this heartbreaking story.
Sure. So I started representing Nick Schuyler, who is the sole survivor of the boating accident in the Gulf of Mexico that took the lives of three of his friends back in 2009, shortly after he was rescued by the United States Coast Guard. And at that time, there were a lot of conspiracy theories out there as to why he lived, why did the others perish, and just some kind of obscene stuff, to be honest with you, online that I found offensive. And so we knew Nick through an associate in our Tampa office, and the family was looking for some help, and I agreed to work with him personally because I thought that some of what was being written or suggested online just offended the sensibilities. And then we began to work together, and one thing led to another in terms of the first telling of this story, which was via HBO Real Sports back in the fall of 2009, and that led to offers for a book. So we put a book together with HarperCollins that became a New York Times bestseller. And as soon as that hit the top of the bestseller list, every studio in the country started calling, interested in turning it into a feature film. And here we are, I guess 16 years or almost 16 years after that time, in finally getting the story told and out in theaters worldwide.
Yeah, that's great. And so you made a promise to Nick and his mom when you first started talking to him about um, you wanted to tell the story the right way, honoring the memory of his friends and everything, right?
Yeah, that was the only way that we were going to make this movie.
Right.
Nick and I made a promise to each other that regardless of what was offered, if we could not make this movie in a compassionate way that honored the memory of his friends and the heroism of the United States Coast Guard, who put their lives at risk to undertake a harrowing search and rescue effort, that we didn't want the movie to be made. And we stayed that course over all this time. It could have been made sooner. There were studios and other producers and entities that had their own vision for it, but it wasn't necessarily aligned with our vision. And we weren't going to allow it to be made until it could be made in a way that we felt was respectful in telling a very difficult story. And I think we've accomplished that.
Yeah, for sure. So after the book was published in 2009, how long was it before you began to work on the plans for the movie idea, and what events occurred that caused the delay of the movie's production and release?
So the the book was published a year to the day after the tragic events, and so that would have been March of 2010. On day one, it went to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, aided by Nick's appearance on the Today Show and an Oprah Winfrey special, and a lot of media surrounding it. And shortly thereafter is when the studios began, to make inquiries about it. And it's interesting because I set the project up originally to produce it with Mark Wahlberg. Mark was going to both produce and star in it as Nick. But that's also the year in 2010 that The Fighter and Ted came out, which both of which Mark starred in. And those were such big movies that year that he got very distracted and pulled into support of those projects. And he never really got, our project off the ground. And so Ironically, I moved away from him, but there's a backstory that I'll come back to there. And shopped it around with some other producers and studios. And well, I didn't really shop it around. I had a long list of those that had come to me looking to make a film. And I set it up with Relativity, which at the time was pretty high flying. They had just made The Social Network and so on. They got Dwayne Johnson attached, and Dwayne was going to star in it. And Dwayne and I hired Nick Mariani, who wrote the original screenplay. We were working our way towards production, and then the studio was forced into bankruptcy by its creditors. And it was really an issue, not so much that they were bankrupt, it's that their catalog of films and library was worth more than the sum total of what they were going to make, presumably going forward. So they wanted to break them up for the value of their library.
Right.
And that just created a whole set of issues. Extracting the rights back and the script and so on. It delayed us a couple of years, and by the time we were ready to go again, Dwayne was already the most in-demand actor in the world, and he couldn't put it on his calendar to make it work anytime soon. So we had to move on from him, and we recast it with Sam Worthington, who's starring in Avatar right now, Fire and Water, and so on. And Sam was quietly attached to the project for about a year, and but we were having trouble lining up the financing the way we needed to, and so that came and went, and we reset it up, and we're ready to start shooting with Miles Teller starring. So Miles Teller was starring as Nick. Jacob Elordi was set to star as Will Bleakley, his best friend. And we were just weeks away from principal photography in the Dominican Republic at the time, and COVID hit. And no movie could be made safely. And so we had to stop again and restart and repackage, new director. And eventually we brought Joe Carnahan on board to direct it, Zachary Levi on board to star, and put a superb cast around him, including Josh Duhamel as U.S. Coast Guard Captain Timothy Close. Got the movie made in 2023 in Malta. That's where we did all the principal photography. And it took a year of post-production, and then you have to get the film calendared for release and do all the marketing around it. And released it around Christmas time, this year, and as a global release. And we're really happy with how it did, and really happy that we were able to, honor the promise that we made to tell the story and tell it the right way.
Right. That's great. You had mentioned one time, one of our conversations, the connections to Raleigh and the triangle other than yourself. What are those?
Yeah, so the story centers one of the key people involved in the story was Corey Smith, who's a former NC State All-American defensive end here for the Wolfpack.
Right.
He, at the time, was playing for the Detroit Lions when he perished in this accident. And so there was the local connection there. As an NC State season ticket holder, I remember watching Corey as, with the Wolfpack, and what a great player he was.
Right.
He and Marquise Cooper, who were the two NFL players who died in this boating accident, were former teammates with the Tampa Bay Bucks, their Super Bowl winning team in 2002. Marquise at the time was with the Oakland Raiders, and he is played by Quentin Blair, who was a former UNC wide receiver who played for the Tar Heels. And Quentin also is one of the stars of the Chad Powers series on Hulu. And so you have both Quentin as a local, UNC product, and Corey as an NC State. So, there's several different touch points that bring the story back to Raleigh.
Right. That's excellent. So the national premiere, I think, with the cast took place in Austin, and then you also had some events in in New York City and St. Pete. And then, of course, it's been released not only here in the U.S., but I think you said it was worldwide in every country except for three. which is
That's
pretty
correct.
amazing for any film release. Um,
Yeah, especially an independent film such as
yeah,
ours.
yeah, for sure. So reviews have been amazing so far that I've seen with, everybody really, getting into the storyline and feeling the emotion and the direness of the effect. And it's been compared to favorably to The Perfect Storm, which was a huge
Mhm.
hit. Tell us about the kind of difference between these two, films and their budgets and how great of a comparison that is for you guys.
Yeah, we're really pleased with the audience reception and the critical reception of the film. When somebody like Richard Roper with RogerEbert.com writes that it compares favorably to The Perfect Storm, you know you've done something right because that was an Oscar nominee. We've also been compared in kind of a unique way to Jaws in some of the reviews. I don't see the parallel quite the same way, other than them both being water-based movies. But our budget, it's interesting because the Perfect Storm's budget back in the day was considerably larger than our budget, and that was in um, you know, early 2000s dollars
Right,
compared to the dollars. So making it even more expensive. Their budget was at least 5 or 6 times ours. So, but things are different now. You can make movies using more VFX and CG and using other creative elements that weren't as readily available to you at that time or were much more expensive to use.
right,
So, it's hard to compare, but their budgets were quite a bit larger
right,
and so on. So, we made the film for about $18 million, roughly. Uh, we had tax rebates, which is why we shot it in Malta that helped offset some of that budget. We shot it in Malta because they have the best open water controlled tanks in the world for shooting a movie like this safely. But it was still no picnic in shooting it. But yeah, to get the kind of critical feedback from some of the top critics that compare us to those kind of films is really gratifying. It's not an easy watch. You get pulled. Joe Carnahan brings you into the water with these guys and their overturned boat and their fight for survival. And when you're back on land, you're feeling the emotion that the families were feeling, hoping and praying that their loved ones would be found and found alive. And so it is a harrowing movie. There's no question about it. And you come out of it probably feeling a little wrung out. But what I would say about that is that that's what these guys went through. And so we couldn't deliver a movie that did anything less. And anything that we put on film is is just a small indication of what they actually went through. I've done a lot of national media interviews and so on. And one of the things I've said repeatedly, and I truly believe this, is that when you make a movie like this, and you put the audience through that kind of emotional turmoil as they're watching it, it's a little uncomfortable. You want them to walk away feeling something. Movies are about making you feel something. They shouldn't just be blindly sitting there with your popcorn, walking out and saying, well, okay, I just spent an hour and a half or 2 hours and it didn't leave me feeling anything. I
right,
think this movie is different in that it will stay with you for a long time. You remember what they went through and how many people beyond just the four of them were impacted by this tragedy. And so that's what we set out to do when we began the production process, and it was always our guiding light.
right. Yeah, I can't even imagine. You were talking about, the impact, emotional impact of people walking away after watching this movie for 2 hours. And I can't even imagine, excuse me, what Nick went through after 43, I think, hours it was
Mhm.
of actually being there and being in the water. I mean, it's incomprehensible to try to imagine what he went through. I mean, just the harrowing and his friends and everything. And you mentioned, filming in Malta in the um, open seawater tanks. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about kind of the behind the scenes and how the the cast and the crew and the director, what they went through to create those effects that they did.
Yeah, all the guys who were involved in the film, in particular the four that were, in the lead roles, top of the cast, all four of them said it was by far the most physically demanding role they've ever undertaken, and really the most, just as quoting Zachary Levi, gnarly. That water was cold. You think of Malta off the coast of Italy, but that's the Atlantic Ocean out there, and the water is frigid, and they were in that water without wetsuits. Well, I should clarify, Zach, because he was wearing a coat in the movie, because that's how Nick survived when he went
Right,
into the water. He had his jacket on. We were able to put a wetsuit under him, so it helped.
right.
The other three guys did not have wetsuits, and they were in that water for multiple takes all day and all night. They would get out, they'd go into warming tents. We'd immediately throw warming coats around them. But Joe Carnahan's a very exacting director, and he doesn't care how many times you've done it. Until he sees it the way he wants to see it on camera, you're going to do it again. And so there were many, many takes of some of these scenes. And Joe was also the kind of director who always wants to keep the actors off balance.
Right.
And so he doesn't, if he tells them, hey, we're going to hit you with a water cannon, or this wave's going to be 6 feet, he's going to tell, you know, uh, the people on set, the prop masters, everyone else, hit him with a 10-foot wave and 4 water cannons,
Right.
so that you never knew what was coming. And the whole idea is that when these guys were out there, they never knew what was going to hit them. They were in the dark a lot of times, and things were just coming at them from everywhere. And so he tried to recreate that kind of feeling for them. And to give them credit, they never complained. Take after take after take, wanting to get it right. And I think all four of them, Terrence Terrell, Quentin Blair, Marshall Cook, and Zachary Levi, just gave us performances of a lifetime.
Yeah, it was definitely a dedication to the craft, enduring all that.
Sure.
So there's also a documentary of this film coming out, I think, next year, right? Which I was fortunate enough to see at
Mhm.
the this past April at Sunscreen Film Festival in St. Pete. And a shout out to festival founder Tony Armour for his celebrating their 20th
Yes.
year anniversary of such a great festival that he had. How does the documentary differ from the feature film, and why two films?
Yeah, it's a good question. Two films is because, when you're making a feature film, you're having to dramatize some of this. You're having to, in some cases, manufacture conversations that took place over all those hours for dialogue purposes and so on. And so it's just a little different. It's fictionalized to a degree,
Right.
although it is a true story, and we try to follow it very faithfully. With the documentary, we had documentary filmmakers. Stephen Cantor, who made the documentary, is an Oscar nominated, many time Emmy winning documentarian. And he wanted to tell it from a very authentic place, but he also wanted to tell it through the lens of the Coast Guard and what they went through, which is a little different than focusing on the four guys and the families the way we do in the feature film.
Right.
And so, and you're also able to talk to the actual people who lived through this experience, whether it was Nick himself, whether it was his wife Paula, his mother, his sister, the Timothy Close, who was the actual Coast Guard captain overseeing the search and rescue effort, which was the largest in U.S. Coast Guard history and still is to this day.
Right.
The actual rescuers, the helicopter pilots, the people on the boat, what they were experiencing. You're able to bring all of them in on a documentary. and so they're different. So the way we decided to do this, and that documentary is a very large budget documentary. It's the largest in cinematic history.
Oh, wow.
And then ironically, Mark Wahlberg came back on board,
Mm.
and since he started this whole thing with me, wanting to help tell the story, and so he's an executive producer on it along with Snoop. And I know this may sound strange, but it's for marketing purposes, and Snoop's closely tied to the NFL these days.
Right.
And so the way we're doing it is, we releasing the film is released theatrically, video on demand will be out shortly, and then the film has been purchased, Not Without Hope has been purchased by Paramount Plus.
Mm.
That will be on streaming in spring, and as that runs through its streaming window, you'll then bump up against the release of the documentary, which right now is planned for a theatrical release as well. We have a distributor on board who wants to release it in August, and it would kind of be, so you saw the feature film. Now here's the real people who lived it,
Right.
and that's the idea behind it. So the story itself is likely to go on for, a full other, year at least,
Right.
just told through a couple different lenses in a couple different ways.
Yeah. I think the theatrical release is a good intro to the documentary, which is, like you said, it's more of the people that were involved, the actual people, which is great. This is a lot of great information. I appreciate you spending some time with us and talking about your film, and wish you the best of luck with the continued viewership and the good reviews coming in. What are your social media and website URL for the film in case people want to learn more?
Yeah, if you just Google "Not Without Hope" film all together, you'll find the handles for it in the various social channels. Um, and it's distinguished with film from the book.
Gotcha.
So easy enough to find anything related to it on any of the platforms via uh, Not Without Hope film.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Well, thanks for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. And telling our viewers, hey, go out and check it out, watch the movie. And then in the spring, when the documentary comes out, definitely check that out as well. I thought that was a great job done on that I saw down in Florida at the sunscreen. And I think people will appreciate the differences and the similarities between both films.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. Congrats again.
Thanks.